for Pacifica Radio, July 25th, April Glaspie Day, 2024. I'm Scott Horton. This is Antiwar Radio. All right, y'all, welcome to the show. It is Anti-War Radio. I'm your host, Scott Horton. I'm the editorial director of Antiwar.com and author of the book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. You can find my full interview archive, more than 6,000 of them now going back to 2003, at scotthorton.org and at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show, and really all your podcatchers and video sites and so forth, /Scott Horton Show. And, of course, I'm here every Thursday from 2:30 to 3 on KPFK 90.7 FM in L.A. And our guest today is Connor Freeman. He's assistant editor at The Institute and Antiwar.com. Welcome back to the show, Connor. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Scott. Thanks for having me back on.
Very happy to have you here. We got a lot to talk about. The leader of the Democratic and Republican Party, Benjamin Netanyahu, came to town to give the Congress their marching orders yesterday. What'd that sound like?
Well, he got 58 standing ovations in a roughly 60-minute speech, which set a record. I mean, this is the most exercise many of these people have gotten, I think, maybe in their lifetime.
You know what that reminds me of? When you read about how many bullets per second gun can shoot, and you're like, wow, really? Wow, the Congress can clap for a foreign leader that many times in that short amount of time. That's really incredible.
Oh, yeah, it's unbelievable. He says that their war is our war, and then he's right about that. As you said, he represents the Democrats and the Republicans. The U.S. owns every bullet and every bomb that's shot or dropped into Gaza. We have underwritten this entire genocidal campaign. And he says that, Iran is responsible for all the problems in the Middle East. They are the barbarians. We represent civilization. Anybody that opposes our war is an anti-Semite traitor standing on the side of evil. And he says that for all we know, all the protesters opposing me outside this building could be funded by Iran. And,
that is so funny.
This comes on the heels of even people like Nancy Pelosi, who, abstained from attending this diatribe and did condemn Netanyahu's speech. She's already said earlier in the war, the FBI should be looking into these people protesting the war. They could be backed by foreign governments like Russia, of course. So Netanyahu just gave a speech condemning any U.S. opposition to American involvement in this war, calling for escalations against Iran and its allies throughout the region, saying, we don't plan to settle Gaza, but we're going to take overriding security control indefinitely of the Strip. And many of the members of his coalition are calling for establishing settlements. They've already stolen 26% of the territory since the war began. And, there was no talk about the civilian casualties in Gaza, and our government is just, completely covered in blood and celebrating a man who's wanted for war crimes and is so concerned about being arrested in Europe that they decided to take a direct flight to the U.S. instead of stopping off in a friendly European country. Because even Germany, who supplied the next most amount of weaponry to Israel over these many years, they've actually said, Berlin has said that if the warrants are issued by the International Criminal Court here and Netanyahu is in Germany, we will arrest him. And so, times there are changing, but certainly not. It's not reflected by our ruling class and by this corrupt Congress, who just once again have completely disgraced themselves. I will say this: I believe about 136 Democrats skipped the speech, and that is encouraging. Also, Thomas Massie, so at least one Republican, did not go either. And Massie, of course, taking the fight to AIPAC, came out and said, this is political theater for the State Department. They're trying to bolster Netanyahu's support inside Israel because he's in trouble, and they want to quell international opposition to the war. And he goes, and I don't feel like being used as a prop, so I'm not going to attend. And then AIPAC, of course, attacked him and said he's on the side of, AOC and the other anti-Semites. And he was just like, whatever, I'm not going to your war rally.
You gotta love that guy. He's growing into the position there, Ron Paul's position in the Congress. All right, so it's Antiwar Radio. I'm Scott Horton talking with Connor Freeman from Antiwar.com. And, the Jewish Daily Forward, the very important newspaper, is extremely dubious about Netanyahu and his claims in here. You know what I mean? So speaking of all who oppose him are anti-Semites. And I got to give the guy credit, Connor. I'm sorry, but I love the line. For all we know, these protesters are backed by Iran. Well, why not just lie and say, well, Mossad tells me that we have secret information that says that they're backed by Iran. Just lie, you damn liar. Why admit that you're the one making it up right now? Are you kidding me?
The whole world knows that they lied about members of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, being involved in the October 7th attack. And we know from credible reporting that they tortured UNRWA staff to extract those just such false confessions. So, yeah, why not lie? They lie about absolutely everything else. And I should say he also said on top of the the claim that Iran is behind apparently every Jewish anti-war protester. They arrested, I believe, over 300 Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now demonstrators at the Cannon Capitol House Office building. The Cannon House Office building, I should say, in the Capitol, the day before he gave this speech. But yeah, he's saying, they're still on the same. He's on the same wavelength as Blinken and Sullivan, trying to, just ink Tom Friedman's dream deal with Saudi Arabia, so they normalize with Israel, and it opens the door to ingratiating the Israeli apartheid state over the dead bodies of all these Palestinians into the whole Muslim world. And he's saying, I have a name for the new alliance, the same NATO-style alliance they've been trying to build for years now, using the Abraham Accords as the foundation. He says we're going to call it the Abraham Alliance. And this is, strongly backed by J.D. Vance, the vice president, ostensibly, who's supposedly scaring the neocons after he's been selected by Trump to be his sidekick. But Vance's whole policy is just like Trump, we got to finish the job in Gaza, where, we can get into more of what's been going on in recent weeks, but, finish the job in Gaza so we can really work on this alliance we're building up and take on Iran. That's the plan. Same way wherever they oppose the war in Ukraine, it's only so they can, build up against China and prepare for a war over Taiwan that much more. All of this is so disgraceful.
Well, and consistent with Trump's narrative that the only reason October 7th happened was because Biden went soft on Iran and then they somehow bankrolled it all, and ran it, I guess, which is completely false, but makes for a nice talking point. And we already have a Gulf Cooperation Council, which is not really a war guarantee, but it's certainly America's list of client states over there, with, Israel not a member, but de facto leader of it anyway, as part of America's order of power in the region. But, I got to wonder whether Netanyahu really wants war with Iran. I mean, they make the perfect foil to have them there to demonize this whole time. And because after all, the Ayatollah has proven time and again, he doesn't really want to fight. In fact, can you explain a little bit about the recent, and we talked about this on the show before, but when Israel killed the Israeli, diplomats or military officers in Syria, and then Iran responded with that missile volley. Didn't they give them 48 hours notice that, hey, we're going to shoot a bunch of missiles, so get your anti-missile missiles ready and so forth?
Yeah, I believe they gave Jordan and Turkey a 72-hour notice, and of course that would have gotten back to the U.S. Yeah, and the interesting thing about that, again, I agree with you. I've always felt that they, giving up Iran as the big boogeyman to justify this constant aid to Israel would be the biggest mistake that the Likud could make. I mean, it's just on its face. This coalition cannot work. Speaking of that situation where you had Iran responding to the bombing of their consulate, killing those top generals and then several civilians in Damascus at the consulate, when they did send over those drones and missiles, some of those American planes that shot them down and intercepted what they could took off from places like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. But there was this whole piece in Middle East Eye about how those states had scrutinized their basing agreements with the Americans in advance, letting them know that if you plan on retaliating against Iran, I should say, you are not going to do that from the bases you have in our territory. We do not want war with Iran. Yeah. We like the situation as it is. Ever since China brokered that landmark peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia last year, Iran has been brought into BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They've normalized relations with Sudan this week. Bahrain is next. Russia has helped broker that. They already normalized relations with Kuwait and the UAE. So, I mean, that's 3 out of 4 of the Abraham Accord states. This whole thing about building this NATO-style coalition and integrating all the air and missile defenses and using the Houthis of all groups as the excuse, as Michael Kurilla has been doing for years now, especially during just as early as his confirmation hearings. He seemed most thrilled about that because now Israel's under CENTCOM since Trump was in office, and so there's all these great opportunities to integrate our forces and take on the Iranians and their partners. I just don't think it's going to happen. I don't think the region wants anything, any kind of open conflict with Iran. Be far too destructive. Charles Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has warned that if Israel does make a serious move against Hezbollah and go into all-out war with Lebanon, that Iran will likely offer significant support to Hezbollah, and that the U.S. could be dragged into that war as well directly. And so, hopefully Netanyahu is just concerned about the fact that a reformist is taking power in Tehran soon as president, Dr. Masoud Pezeshkian. He wants direct talks with the U.S. He wants to get back into the Iran nuclear deal. And there's a real opportunity here for some diplomacy. And I'm sure that they're at least somewhat concerned about that, because there's no reason for the U.S. not to return to the deal. Biden has been arguably more hawkish on Iran than Donald Trump was. He's expanded the sanctions. There have been major assassination campaigns and Israeli covert attacks on their civilian nuclear program throughout Biden's term. And, of course, there have been escalations in Syria this whole time as well. Israel bombs the country almost every week, and that was even before October 7th, going back years since the dirty war against Damascus. But, maybe he's just concerned about that because it's going to be glaringly obvious when this guy takes power, this new president, that, again, there is no reason for the U.S. to be at odds with Iran. It has everything to do with Israel's priorities and not the U.S. interest. And increasingly, the rest of the region doesn't want any part of this either.
Yeah.
Hey, guys, I've had a lot of great webmasters over the years, but the team at expanddesigns.com have by far been the most competent and reliable. Harley Abbott and his team have made great sites for the show and the Institute, and they keep them running well, suggesting and making improvements all along. Make a deal with expanddesigns.com for your new business or news site. They will take care of you. Use the promo code SCOTT and save $500. That's expanddesigns.com. Man, I wish I was in school so I could drop out and sign up for Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom instead. Tom has done such a great job on putting together a classical curriculum for everyone from junior high schoolers on up through the postgraduate level. And it's all very reasonably priced. Just make sure you click through from the link in the right margin at scotthorton.org. Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. Real history, real economics, real education.
People say to me, Scott, how do you get so much work done all the time? Coffee. It helps keep me from falling asleep. And it tastes really good because I get it from Moondo's Artisan Coffee at moondosartisancoffee.com. Moondo's is kind of the anti-Starbucks in that their coffee tastes real good. They have lots of great choices, representing all kinds of regions, blends, and flavors. I'm drinking the Ethiopian presently. Hey, wait, also, do you like saving money on good-tasting coffee? Right now, you can get 10% off and help support this show if you just go to moondosartisancoffee.com/Horton. Find the link and the QR code in the margin at scotthorton.org. That's moondosartisancoffee.com/Horton.
Well, and that's the thing of it. I was just interviewing Danny Davis, and he was like, look, Iran don't want to fight, but boy, I'll tell you what, they could, though. And no, they couldn't attack the United States. They couldn't hurt us. worst that we're probably facing would be a massive missile volley, and maybe like far beyond what America and its allies can keep up with to try to shoot down against, obviously Israel, and also against American and allied positions in the Gulf, in Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar. And we got the whole Fifth Fleet station at Bahrain, and the Al Ulid Air Base in Qatar is the home of Central Command over there. And of course, we got, I don't know how many tens of thousands of troops in Kuwait and in Saudi Arabia, and et cetera. And of course, economic targets in the trillions if it comes to that. So that ought to be enough deterrent for you. Let's not fight them if we don't have to. You know what I mean? It's not a question whether they threaten us. It's a question of, if Biden sent in all the B-52s, still, what would it cost us? Because I think you mentioned this, I think it's a real possibility that if they got into a tangle, if Israel got into a tangle with Hezbollah beyond this tit for tat thing going on lately, that they'd have to call in the B-52s, that Israel can't take them without America to come in there. And at that point, I don't know what's going to happen, what Iran would do at that point, or I think a lot of bets would be off, including maybe our alliances with some of these Sunni states at that time. So I guess I wonder, if I could put that in the form of a question, have you seen much talk about that with American national security professionals concerned that they're really going to get dragged into a war with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon?
Well, yeah, I think the overriding concern, and these reports have been coming out, back at the beginning of the year, especially, we heard about these DIA assessments where they've looked it over and wargamed the probability of how Israel would fare, especially given that they're overstretched in Gaza as it is. Netanyahu boasts about how we're fighting a 7-front war and all this stuff. And they've said if they go into fight Hezbollah, they're not going to be able to sustain that themselves. And so the implication is that Netanyahu wants this war to stay in power. And certainly Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, who's the occupation governor of the West Bank, and then the other, worst hawks in the coalition like Itamar Ben-Gvir, they're very gung-ho on taking the war to Lebanon next. We've even heard from some top Israeli officials that if there is a ceasefire in Gaza, even temporarily, that's only going to be to give Israel's military some rest so that they can go and focus on Hezbollah and then really take that fight up to southern Lebanon. And so, yeah, I mean, the implication is that Israel will not be able to fight them by themselves, and it's going to require U.S. support. And this has been the major concern the whole time. It's one of the reasons why, thankfully, the U.S. and Iran are having some sort of indirect talks via Oman to try and keep tensions low, because if they do attack southern Lebanon in earnest, I think it would activate much of the axis of resistance against Israel, which is really what Netanyahu is saying. He's saying, we're going to fight the axis of resistance and we want your support, including probably, especially if Iran got involved to any serious degree, with U.S. troops on the ground. And we already see, Tel Aviv was hit by a Houthi drone strike last week, which killed one person in an apartment building and injured, I believe, 9 or 10 other people. And then now Israel's bombing Yemen. They bombed fuel depots in Hodeidah, caused a massive fire and killed, I believe, 6 people and injured dozens and dozens more. And the Houthis are saying, great, we wanted this. Let's go to, we're honored to fight you. We relish going into direct conflict with the Israelis. And the Houthis have been, nothing the U.S. and the U.K. have done thus far has hindered them and their attacks on Israeli-linked shipping and U.S. and U.K. linked vessels, military or otherwise, in the Gulf of Aden and in the Red Sea. I believe June was the highest month yet for strikes. And this is after the Americans have carried out hundreds of strikes in Yemen so far. We spent over $1 billion on this campaign, this new war against the Houthis. And we have naval commanders going, this is the greatest naval battle since the Second World War. And it's unbelievable. This is against the poorest nation in the Middle East. These are the people standing up for the Palestinians. And the war in Yemen killed more than 400,000 people, very much it has a lot of similarities to the way the war is being carried out in Gaza. You put a full blockade onto this very poor country where they rely on, food imports. Yemen relied on imports for 90% of its food. And they put these people under blockade and then bombed every manner of civilian infrastructure you can think of, anything that could sustain life. And they killed hundreds of thousands of people, mostly infants and children under 5 years old. But these are the people that are standing up on behalf of the Palestinians, while the U.S. is, claiming we support a two-state solution and we're concerned about, the humanitarian crisis. And meanwhile, we've sent Israel 14,000, 2,000-pound bombs, 250 different arms transfers to support this war on Gaza. Most of these people at this point, I'm reading these stories of people who have been displaced 10, 12 times before they're killed. It's just absolutely merciless, and they've destroyed so much of the water infrastructure that now people are getting less than a third of the required minimum. There's this new study by Oxfam about how the Palestinians in Gaza have less than a third of the recommended minimum for survival in emergencies of water, because 100% of the sanitation plants, the wastewater sanitation plants have been destroyed. 70% of the sewage pumps in Gaza and the water quality testing labs have been destroyed. They're saying there's 5 attacks on critical water infrastructure every 3 days on average. And it's just insane. And the Hezbollah has made very clear, just like the Houthis, that as soon as there's a ceasefire, we'll stop attacking Israel. And we'll stop. And the Houthis have said they'll stop implementing this blockade. There needs to be a ceasefire and a withdrawal. And that is the one thing that Benjamin Netanyahu, one of the many things, but certainly in these negotiations, he's deliberately, even according to David Barnea, the head of the Mossad, who is the lead negotiator in these indirect talks brokered by the Qataris and the Egyptians, he's saying Netanyahu is the one preventing any kind of a deal, because he insists on, we're going to control the Philadelphia corridor, the Gaza-Egypt border indefinitely, forever, basically forever. And we're going to have a screening process for any of the Palestinians going back up north, which, means they're going to be kidnapping and torturing more and more people. There can be no armed men in North Gaza, of course. That's his stipulation. And then he says we're not accepting any deal that doesn't allow us to go in there after any sort of a respite and wipe out Hamas, eradicate Hamas, destroy their military capabilities, destroy their capability to govern. And we have heard, the Gallant told the families of these hostages before Netanyahu left for the States, he said, look, we have a consensus. Shin Bet, Mossad, the IDF, everybody says there's no obstacle that we can't overcome right now. Right now, we should make a deal. And even if it's on the more hawkish end of a justification, like Herzi Halevi, the IDF chief of staff, apparently told Netanyahu recently in a war cabinet meeting that, look, we can have a brief ceasefire. It'll give the army a rest and it'll get the hostages, and then you can go back and kill all the Palestinians. And still, that's not good enough. And I should say regarding the Philadelphia corridor, the Gaza-Egypt border, Egypt, the whole thing is Netanyahu is saying, well, we're going to prevent any sort of weapons transfers from Egypt into the Strip. So the Egyptians said, we'll build an underground wall to prevent any sort of weapons transfers. And the U.S. said, we'll fund that wall. We'll pay for it. And Netanyahu is still saying no. So, I mean, and there were families of hostages of American citizens who told the House Foreign Relations Committee the same kind of thing we've been talking about week after week, that Netanyahu is the one, subverting and thwarting any attempt to make a ceasefire deal to get the hostages out and to give allow the Palestinians to have some access to humanitarian aid. I mean, Lancet is estimating right now is the way things, if the war stopped right now, probably over 186,000 people would be dead through direct and indirect causes, violence of the war, direct violence and the indirect effects of the war, the destruction of all the infrastructure and the starvation.
Elaborate about that a bit, Connor. It sounded kind of future tense the way you phrased that.
Yeah, sure. Lancet is saying that because the indirect deaths of modern wars are usually 3 to 15 times greater than the direct deaths. If you take currently, the death toll in Gaza is over 39,000 now. And I think they put out this report, they were talking about up to June. But anyway, they said the minimum estimate is that roughly 186,000 people will be dead in the next few years, even if the war stopped now, because of the diseases that have been spreading, the ramifications of the starvation siege, and the destruction of infrastructure. I mean, polio is now being found. The Palestinian Health Ministry and UNICEF just carried out some tests on some. They got some sewage samples and found polio.
I gotta say though, as editorial director, I don't like that number of extrapolating out in the future tense. I mean, we're going to talk about it could be, something.
Yeah, sure.
186,000 is like some
we're almost
made
at
up
40,000
thing.
people killed now. Anyway,
I mean, if you told me in 5 years this is how many excess deaths that we can calculate have happened, that's one thing. You can try to extrapolate, but I hear people citing that number as how many people have already been killed, not even just died in the circumstances. But as you say, what they actually wrote was will die over the next while. I mean, come on.
Right.
But anyway, point being, it's still tens of thousands of innocent people. They're bombing schools. They're bombing, which are, refugee shelters, bombing soccer games, mauling Down syndrome victims with German shepherds and leaving them to bleed to death. They're carpet bombing people in their refugee tents with 2,000-pound bombs. This is the most merciless violence going on the face of the planet right now.
Yeah, over 120 schools have been bombed. We've seen there's a new report from Drop Site. They got to look at a confidential UN report that says that in addition to the 200 or so UN aid workers who have been killed, I believe 172 members of their families have been killed as well. We've seen strikes on 561 different internally displaced Palestinian sheltering and UNRWA buildings have been killed, and over 1,700 more wounded. You have like 500 healthcare workers have been killed. I believe 274 different aid workers have been killed. They were just shooting another UN aid convoy over the weekend. And this is on top of we see these massacres in the so-called safe zones where they bombed the Al-Mawasi tent camp with 5 2,000-pound bombs, killed over 90 people, mostly women and children. And this latest attack on Khan Yunis, they've displaced over 150,000 people. And they're telling them there's nowhere to go. According to the UN, 80% of the strip is now a no-go zone, which, as you know from the 972 MAG reports in Israeli media from these IDF sources, that they just kill people out of boredom in those no-go zones. The rules of engagement are if you see somebody and they're walking towards you, you can shoot them. It doesn't matter. Women, children, the elderly, just shoot them. And they do. I mean, there's this latest, there's been reports in Politico and CBS News recently about these American surgeons who went to Gaza saying they've never seen anything like this. Just child after child shot in the head or shot in the chest and shot in the head. This doctor, one of the guys is named Dr. Mark Perlmutter, and he was speaking with CBS Sunday morning. And he said, I had children who were shot twice. I have 2 children that I have photographs of that were shot so perfectly in the chest that I couldn't put my stethoscope over their heart more accurately and directly on the side of the head in the same child. He goes, no toddler gets shot twice by the world's best snipers. He said, I've done 40 mission trips in 30 years, ground zero, earthquakes, all that combined doesn't equal the level of carnage I saw against civilians in just my first week in Gaza. And he says most of the wounded and most of the people being killed and wounded are children. He says it's almost exclusively children. I've never seen that before. Never seen that. I've seen more incinerated children than I've ever seen in my life combined. I've seen more shredded children in just the first week, with missing body parts, crushed by buildings or bomb explosions. I've taken shrapnel as big as my thumb out of 8-year-olds. And the Gaza Health Ministry is saying that now 16,000 children have been killed in Gaza alone. And that's to say nothing of the West Bank, where they're up to, it's almost 580 people have been killed.
And how many are
October
officially
7th.
missing as of now, Connor?
Well, that last report, I believe from Save the Children, was 20,000. And that includes people who are, because the number still stands. And I think it's been out, it's stayed at 10,000 or so for months and months and months now. But there's about 10,000 Palestinians who are presumed dead or buried under rubble. So those children, plus the unaccounted children who their parents can't find them, it's over 20,000 at this point. So it's difficult. We discussed this before on the last time I was on about the Cy Hirsch piece about how when it comes to getting accurate death tolls, because of the nature of the way the war is being carried out, because they're bombing the south, they're laying siege to the north and carrying out massacres, all over Gaza City and all the different neighborhoods,
Right.
and bombing central Gaza. There's no way for aid groups or monitors to get in there and come up with an accurate counting of how many people are being killed.
What really counts is that the most conservative estimates are way too high. It's completely insane. Netanyahu's right that it's barbarianism versus civilization, but he clearly is the barbarian. And he himself cites a 3,000-year-old text for permission explicitly to kill innocent men, women, and children by falsely, obviously, accusing them of being some tribe that doesn't exist anymore. And he invokes God's advice 3,000 years ago to the ancient Hebrews to destroy Amalek and cites that specifically in his instructions to the IDF. That is what they are to do, is to kill civilians. And it's all on America's dime and with the roaring applause of America's bought and paid for traitorous representatives in Congress, as ever, and apparently as shall always be too. Anyway, all right, I'm sorry, we're out of time, but thank you so much for your time, for coming back on the show, Connor. Appreciate it.
Of course, Scott. Thank you.
All right, you guys, that's Connor Freeman. He is assistant editor at The Institute and at Antiwar.com. And that's it for Antiwar Radio. We'll be back here next Thursday at 2:30 on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA.